I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. Today is Thursday, August 11th, 2020. And I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along wherever you are. Want you to connect. Name of this program, really, name of the concept is connecting us in ways that we can show our appreciation of our own minds, our own bodies, our own hearts, our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own aspirations, our expectations of ourselves and of community, our own commitment, our own obligation, our own requirement that we see ourselves as authors of the future. And so I call this show a show of companions, the idea being that those of us who are here every week are friends going back a long, long, long way and have demonstrated a commitment, a focus to this idea of promoting accountability, responsibility, sovereignty, and respect for our culture, the ancestors, and our duty, our obligation to speak to and to speak the future. So, with that beginning, I want to just say hi to my co-host Brenda Lyle-Gray, who joins us every day from New Mexico. Brenda, how you doing?
Fine.
And let me say hello to Brother Ndugu Yusef Mgeni. Brother Yusef, how you doing, man?
Very good, thank you. Good afternoon, Al. Brenda.
Good.
And Plain Trust.
Let me always acknowledge Vash Bodhi, who's not on camera, but who is doing magical wizardry and moving, helping us go to the next level. That's what our goal is. So, Vash has joined me for at least a period of a quarter and maybe more, depending on how things go, to help take the program up, to organize, routinize, improve in every aspect. And I can tell you that for me and my team, we're happy to have this relationship, his investment of energy, ideas, and wealth of experience in helping us move in this direction. So Vash, thank you again. I want to always acknowledge you publicly and privately as I do. Yusef, what's on your mind, man?
Well, we had primary elections yesterday here and across the country, and there were a number of African Americans running locally. From the East Metro standpoint of our capital city, St. Paul, John Thompson lost in his bid for re-election to a Hmong candidate for the Minnesota House of Representatives, the state legislature. A Somali brother was endorsed for the seat that Rena Moran will be vacating for Senate District 65, the Summit University, Thomas Dale, North End, Lexham area here in St. Paul.
She's actually House 65A or 65B, I think. Rena.
I believe she's 65A. I think 65B is Carlos Mariani's ward primarily on the west side and the West 7th area, and parts of the east side. Zuki Ellis, former African-American female board chair of the St. Paul Board of Education, was running against State Senator Sandy Pappas, who has all of Senate District 65, which includes House seats 65A and B. Sandy handily won the primary. There were 4 candidates vying for the seat, which will be vacated this year by Tony Carter, the chair of the Ramsey County Board.
Mm-hmm.
There are 19 cities in Ramsey County, and Tony is the commissioner for District 4. George Jackson, Rena Moran, and Reverend Darrell Spence were the 3 African-American candidates vying for that seat with one other challenger. And Rena Moran, who currently serves in the state legislature, got 79% of the vote. Pardon me. So she's clearly a favorite for election to Tony's seat, at least at this point. And John Thompson, who is a controversial member of the House representing District 67 on the east side, a very good friend, very dear friend of Philando Castile, whose name I'm sure that all of us recall, lost in his bid for re-election to another Hmong candidate over on the east side. John only secured 10% of the vote. So when I say controversial, he had several scrapes with the media, with law enforcement, and they just went after him with the tar brush in the media and in public. He was expelled from the Minnesota DFL caucus, and apparently the attack against him was successful, at least politically. But nationally, Wisconsin is being cited as a very clear battleground state because there's a brother over there whose first name is Mandela, who won the primary running for the United States Senate.
Mandela Barnes.
And he is being touted as the blueprint for how more African Americans can and should be elected to the United States Senate. So that will be an interesting race because he is quite popular in Wisconsin and by the political circles and by residents over there, voting residents at any rate. So interesting times. A number of candidates who were endorsed by the former occupant in the White House won their primaries, and one of whom was present during the January 6th insurrection rally. And others who have supported the notion, the big lie, or stop the steal, who are conspiracy supporters. And that includes, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz's Republican opponent, who some people suspect, may be a member of QAnon or some of the far-right conspiracy circles within the Republican Party. So very small turnout, which is usually the case for midterms. I think we had 16% in Minnesota. They had 26% in Wisconsin. But probably the tightest race in Minnesota was in your backyard, and that was for the primary for the 5th Congressional District. And Ilhan Omar, who is a member of the Squad or one of the outstanding progressives in Congress, was running against Don Samuels, a former city council member who I believe was also a member of the Minneapolis Board of Education. Samuels got 48% of the vote, and Ilhan Omar won with 50% of the vote, with 98% of the precincts reporting. So that race was much, much closer than anyone had anticipated. But again, the turnout in primary elections is not overwhelming. And he made two comments. One, he said that his coming so close to victory was an indication that Ilhan Omar was beatable. And Ilhan has also been a controversial member of Congress in terms of some of the statements that she has made and subsequently has either had to apologize for or backtrack somewhat. An interesting point, when Keith Ellison was the first African-American from Minnesota and the first Muslim elected to Congress, I think Keith got 26,000 votes in the 5th Congressional District. Do you know how many votes Ilhan Omar got in the last election?
I should know, but tell me.
76,000.
Okay. So
her and her troops knocked on doors in the 5th Congressional District 5 times during the campaign. And there was a tremendous turnout for her. And it will be noteworthy to see how she does in the general election. The other comment that Don...
But in this election, I'm looking at the story in Insight News. I'll put it on screen. And I don't know if you can make that bigger or not. But it says that this year, for that election, the turnout was significantly lower, a total of 115,000. And of that, Ilhan ended up with 50.3 or 4% versus Don. I think when you added Don and the three other people who were competing, vying for the DFL primary bid, Don plus the other three together were about maybe 1,000 votes short of unseating Ilhan.
Out of how many?
About 1,000 votes short, I think.
No, what was the total?
The total who voted was 115,000.
Yeah, that's
and
tight.
Let me see if I can see what Ilhan's actual numbers were just in a second here.
Yeah. The other tell that Samuel shared was that he believes he would have been elected if people were allowed to vote cross parties.
Yep.
Which says something. Much of his campaign was anti Ilhan Omar, focusing on her support of the defund the police ballot initiative in Minneapolis. And we should talk about defund the police at some point in time, because the media and the conservative pundits really defined that topic and turned it into something that many of the people on the ground working for a reallocation of police resources did not intend. They did not want 100% of the money taken away from the police. They wanted social workers, mental health workers sent out on those 911 calls that warranted their support, rather than armed police officers for, non-violent type incidents. But nonetheless, he really hammered on her support of defund the police and some of the other controversial statements that she was identified with. But you were going to look up something else?
Well, let me just sort of share some of this. We ran running a story in Monday's Insight, which is at the press right now. We're using a story that we're taking from Men Post. And it says that on Tuesday night, Ilhan Omar effectively won a third term representing Minnesota's 5th congressional district after she narrowly defeated former Minneapolis City Council member Don Samuels by 2.2 percentage points in the DFL primary for the seat. In a heavily Democratic district, Omar is a sure win in the November election against Republican Cicely Davis, who cleared a small GOP primary field Tuesday night. But the close DFL primary race had some pundits speculating that there may be a crack in the sometimes polarizing Omar's armor. Until Tuesday, she had easy victories in primaries, winning handily in 2018 and in 2020, due in large part to big turnout, huge margins of victory in Minneapolis, which makes up most of the district. So it goes on to say that compared to the previous DFL primaries, in this case, Don Samuels, her opponent, managed to cut into Omar's significant advantage in the city of Minneapolis. In 2020, Omar beat her challenger, Antoine Melton Moe, interesting spelling of the name, M-E-A-U-X, who ran as a more moderate DFLer. She beat him by 19.7 percentage points. And her victory was almost entirely due to the fact that she had the advantage of the city of Minneapolis, where the vast majority of the district votes are located. So she beat Melton Moe by nearly a 2-to-1 margin and won more votes than her challenger in many of the district suburbs as well.
Yeah. Question. Does the 5th congressional district also wind down around to the west bank of the University of Minnesota?
All of Minneapolis, the entire city of Minneapolis. And then
it's worth pointing out for viewers and listeners who may not be familiar with the demographics of Minneapolis that Minneapolis has the largest population of Somalis in the world outside of, Somalia.
Yeah.
And Ilhan Omar herself is Somalian. So,
and that's interesting too, because the Somali community, while it appears to be uniform to those of us outside of it, may not be as uniform as we think. And within that community are historical, almost tribal or ethnic differences. And though it's not broadcast, if you examine closely, you will find the community from Somaliland, for example, siding differently from communities from Puntland or any of the other major geographic and ethnic bridges there. So I think part of this, I think there was less division in and among Somalis the first two times. There may have been more division in and among Somalis this time, which explains how she didn't get the numbers that she might have, that we might have expected. But those numbers are significant, Yusef, as you're saying. So, while she won on a 2-1 margin over Milton Moe in 20, this time she only won 1.3 votes per Don Samuel's 1 vote in Minneapolis.
2 percentage points.
And Samuel's got more votes than her in most of the suburbs. So that's the difference, right? And so the question is, she said in her interviews with us a few weeks ago, I think last week, maybe last Tuesday, Brenda, I think, that, the conservatives that support Donald Trump and then the moderates who are kind of indecisive are moving into, and or if not moving into, their funding the initiative to defeat her. So the money against her was coming from conservative Democrats, the so-called moderate and conservative Democrats, but really a lot of money coming from Republicans who wanted to remove her. And the sidebar that's in the story that's coming out Monday, the headline on that is that, because she said that, well, I'll read it. Headline is that she withstands a $600,000 attack from a conservative DFLer, that's Don Samuels, but now braces for a $2 million Republican attack. I say that Ilhan Omar's campaign said Republican and conservative Democrats worked in lockstep to unseat her, spending millions of dollars, quote, millions of dollars to silence our movement. She said corporations and special interest groups poured hundreds of thousands of dollars behind attacks with ads, with one super PAC funded by corporate donors, spending more than $600,000 in ads in the final days of the race. So she said in her victory statement on Wednesday that despite this barrage of attacks and attempts to undermine her work for progress, her People First movement won yesterday. So she's banking on that continuing to be the case in the future. But it means it's worth watching. What it means too, even though she is likely to win, despite a multi-million-dollar initiative
to defeat her
by a Black woman. Her what's her name again? It's in the story. The Republican candidate against her is, one second, interesting, Cicely Davis. You know who she is?
Doesn't ring a bell.
Doesn't ring one with me either. But she is the Republican candidate. And I looked, and she's is it Candace Owens? Is that the person that's a national spokesperson for white power? Is that the right person, Brenda? Is that the right name? I think
I'm not for sure, but she won her primary.
She
was
did.
The third one that won. Yeah.
Well, so
and it was her last name begins with a B. I can't think of it.
Well, I mean, her name is Davis. It's let me see. I've got it right here again. Cicely Davis. She's the GOP.
Oh no, I hadn't heard from her.
Yeah. So
I heard about her.
New to me, and I think she's coming up as like kind of a Trumper type Black person. So it'll be interesting to see what she will do. The reason I bring it up, Yusef, is because, as you said, Don Samuel said if he was able to get Republicans to vote for him, he would have been able to knock off Ilhan. So now Republicans theoretically are going to be lockstep behind Cicely Davis, their endorsed candidate. But whether that really makes a dent in the Democratic stronghold of Minneapolis and of the district, we will see.
Well,
what
three
it does
things.
do is talk about the future. If Ilhan is weakened by these challenges, both within the party and more money from outside, what happens 2 years from now and beyond that? That's the question.
And what does it do to the House majority in Congress?
Yeah.
There are three things, Al. First, it's easier to tell people what you're against than it is to tell people what you're for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that many of the candidates are campaigning about what they're against rather than what they represent or what they hope, what categories of possibility they command and intend to champion. The second piece is that there is still a large number of people in our community who will vote for a candidate because of the color of her or his skin without any knowledge of their political posture or history or experience in our community. And the third piece is that the name of the game is follow through. And the winner of the general election in November in the 5th Congressional District is going to be based on one thing, plain and simple, and that's turnout.
Yeah.
Who can get people to come out to the polls? And midterm elections are historically tragic for elected officials in the Democratic Party. And every 4 years when we have a midterm election, we see greater potential for this power shift within the House and the Senate. And right now we have a 50-50 split in the Senate, although with Manchin and the woman I call Senator Enema, I think her name is really Sinema, but I call her Senator Enema, who are, Republicans in Democratic clothing. They, a couple of months ago, the big issue was inflation. It was COVID-19. It was
climate,
critical race theory. It was just real crazy. And the pundits were saying the Republicans are guaranteed to take control of both houses. Now, we had an interesting event this week down at Mar-a-Lago where two branches of government, the executive and the judicial, both signed off on a search warrant to enter the former occupant of the White House's home and left with 15 boxes because they believed and were able to provide evidence to a judge that criminal activity had taken place regarding national secrets and documents that should have been conveyed to the National Archives, but were not. Now, the former occupant of the White House is complaining that, his house was raided, that they broke into his safe, all the while pleading the fifth in terms of, the criminal indictment and grand jury testimony in New York. He pleaded the Fifth Amendment more than 100 times. For those people not aware, that means that he refused to testify on the grounds that he might incriminate himself. He's got 39 legal cases pending, all of which are felonies and carry prison time. And Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, head of the Justice Department, had his people go to the judicial branch, to a judge, with enough evidence to get a search warrant signed, inform the Secret Service, and then went into Mar-a-Lago, and as I said, left the premises with 15 boxes of evidence that were covered under the search warrant. The former occupant of the White House refuses to make the search warrant public so that people know exactly what was on the agenda, the criminal activity that they were investigating. And you've got all of these Republican elected officials coming out of the woodwork talking about the sky is falling, run and tell the king, we've got to get rid of the FBI because they've invaded the emperor's, Florida palace. And it is not only unprecedented, which is not just a poor choice of words, but it's bizarre, which is probably more accurate, because people have been wondering, with the January 6th hearings and all of the other activity taking place, the district for the Southern District Attorney for New York, pressing her case about fraud in terms of his businesses. And then you only have to look at what happened with Trump University. It turned out to be a fraud. What's happened with his niece, who is suing him because he devalued his assets when he divided up his brother's share of the company that they jointly owned. And her lawsuit is going forward. And they mistakenly delivered 39 boxes of incriminating evidence to her house, which she promptly turned over to the district attorney in New York City, which is now the foundation of the case, that the felony indictment that they're moving forward with. So when the Chinese liked you in passing, they would say, "May you live in moderate times." And if they didn't like you or they weren't sure, they would say, "May you live in interesting times." And these are clearly interesting times for the former occupant of the White House as we head into the presidential elections in 2024. So we'll see what happens.
There was a comment as you were speaking from Ruth Richardson, and sent a link to her. Ruth, if you're watching or available, join the conversation. We'd love to have your viewpoint, your analysis, and commentary. So the link is there. If you have the time, please join the call.
Also, Sean Lewis was looking for one, and hello to Alicia Corcoran, who joined us at the top of the hour.
Right. Okay. Well, I sent them notes as well. So, I think this is fascinating. Yusef, Brenda, do you think we're going to see an eventual indictment of the former president?
I think more so in New York. I'm not for sure about Marlin or Garland, but I know that the Attorney General in New York did not run for an office, I think governor, because she was determined that she was going to get Trump. And she told him that. She just point blank said, "I am going to get you." And so, whoa. And that's been what, about 18 months that she's been
building this case.
So
building this case.
I don't know. I don't agree with Liz Cheney, but bless her picking heart, because she opened up that door. She was willing to give it up for her country. Because if someone had not opened the door, I'm reading this little book, and it's just called January 6th, and it's called A Patriot Story. And I'm almost finished with it, but if you get through it, it's like, oh, what's going to happen November 8th, 2022? It is going to be chaotic, a mockery. There's not going to be any validation for what's a good vote, what's a bad vote, and what machines work and what doesn't work. And they're raising so much money. That man could go out and just spray and with bullets.
The conservatives have been using the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago for fundraising purposes. They've cranked up the machine, and they're begging all over the country for people to get
all
in their purses
over
and their
the
wallets,
world.
put
They're
that money on the table
from everywhere.
And he raised almost $100 million trying to defend himself around January 6th, and can use that money for whatever purpose he wants. He raised about $100 million for Stop the Steal. And there were no limitations on how that money was restricted or had to be used. He could use it to buy shoes or buy another golf club if he wanted to.
But that's so scary because they're following him. What does that say about them?
Well, it says 74 million people voted for him. 74 million people voted for him. And he is in single-handed control of the Republican Party. The Republican Party might as well be called the Trump Party, because that's what it is.
Well, it's like that article from CNN that I sent y'all. You know, it says if you're going after a king, don't miss.
Yeah.
Meaning to miss is dangerous, right?
They think they have missed already, but I don't think they would have gone in the FBI and the Department of Justice unless they had something in their back pocket.
Well, Brenda, Al, what other president in the final, 2-3 weeks of his presidency was selling get out of jail free cards to people who were willing to contribute vast sums of money for his personal use? I mean, just doling out presidential pardons like he was playing penny pinochle for people making contributions for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then had the full support of the party that he represented to run for re-election.
So what happens, Yusef, if we end up getting criminal indictments, a trial, whether it's successful or not, but the fact that it happens, it's like, well, he's been impeached twice, so he's been on trial twice. But if he is tried in a criminal court, it'll more likely be because the prosecutor feels that he has substantial evidence to prove, the prosecutorial case. What happens if he's prosecuted, convicted, perhaps jailed? What happens in your mind with the 74 million who voted for him? And I raised the question, harking back to our previous week's discussion when we've been considering the question of civil war. Is that what's ahead of us, Yusef?
Well, I see two things, Al. Number one, the immediate cries will be that there was a planned persecution, that the attacks were deliberate, that they went after him, that they manufactured evidence that he was innocent. They will not believe that he was guilty, even if he's convicted by a jury full of Republicans. Okay, number one. To the same extent that they believe that the election in 2020 was stolen, okay, with absolutely no evidence whatsoever. So they are not going to believe the evidence that he's been found guilty. If he's convicted of a felony, he's prohibited from running for re-election. The second thing that happens after they cry in their beer for several months is going to be the chaos of who do we replace him with? Is it Ted Cruz? Is it what's the boy, Marco Rubio, the boy from Cuba? Is it one of these QAnon folks? Is it some other? Is it Mike Pence, or who is going to be the next Trump? Because they believe, remember when he used to be a columnist for the Atlanta newspaper. He was the only one in the country who took the bait from the FBI and printed the reports about Martin Luther King's sex life. He was in Congress. His wife divorced him. What was his name? Oh gosh.
From Georgia?
He was the one who stirred up the resentment among white males that they had been victimized. A national columnist. Oh gosh, I can't remember his name. I'm sorry. I think I've got Alzheimer's.
Roland Martin.
No, I think I'm halfway to Alzheimer's. I've got Alzheimer's. Anyhow, he tapped into this vein of resentment among white people that they were the victims. White males.
The former Speaker of the House, right? You mean the former Speaker of the House?
Newt Gingrich is who.
Yeah, there you go.
Newt Gingrich, and he came up with that plan. And I forget what his proposal was called. It's been by now 15, 20 years ago that, but white males were foaming at the mouth to line up behind him and support, his proposal, his belief that they were the victims. And I think that the Republican Party has really exploited victimization to the nth degree. And they've bought it hook, line, and sinker. They've sold it. They've shared it, and they're committed to it. That somehow, there's no process in a democracy to guarantee the rights of the minority, okay, whether it's racial, whether it's numerical. And the numerical minority in our country are the Republicans. They're vastly outnumbered by Democrats, but they have a better mechanism for getting people to the polls, and then they have the Electoral College for backup, so that even though we've had two presidents who didn't win the popular vote, they won the electoral vote, and went to the White House, and we have a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court as a result of it. But it's interesting. I think there will be bloodletting to see who his replacement is, if he is indicted and convicted. And I think that we're going to continue to hear disbelief coming from the right and the woe is me, like woebegone cries that, we're continuing to victimize the Republicans and the wealthy and the rich. The 1% of the top 1% are going to continue to make money hand over fist and try and do everything in their power.
Conflict that may arise.
Yeah.
And foment the conflict. Well, let me ask you both to put on your nightmare caps and imagine how the deal will go down. Maybe think back in the movies that you've watched or stories you've read or things you've heard, things you fear. And because I can't get my head around, Yusef and Brenda, this idea of a civil war. I'm sitting here on Thomas Avenue in North Minneapolis, in the middle of the heart of Minneapolis's North Side Black community. And so I'm asking myself, so Trump's people decide it's all or nothing, go for broke. And he sounds that final alarm that he tried to initiate in part or practice with on January 6th, but he kind of had them mute their munitions and their weapons and to not reveal, their fullest lethal intent outside of words.
Stand down, but stand by.
So what happens if the call goes out, this is it? I mean, because I think that could happen. I personally feel that the character of the quote unquote classic Americanist, identity is give them hell, go get them, hell or high water, do or die. This is it. And that is so dangerous. That's what I think that's out there. But what do you think?
Brenda, why don't I allow you to go first, dear?
I don't even know what to say because I'm trying to think who is going to replace Biden. Kamala's name has never come up. So who do we have in our pocket to go against them?
Let me hold up a second. I see Ruth Richardson has joined and she's backstage. And thank you, Ruth, for watching the program. Thank you for being here. So I'm just blue sky speculating, and I don't want to be alarmist, but I'm hearing and feeling that it's worth talking about where we are and to be sober about it. But let me ask you to come on screen. You're there, and talk about anything that you've heard of today's conversation. Introduce yourself if you would.
Hi, first of all, I'm a little under the weather, but thank you for the invite. I'm Ruth Richardson, and I am serving in the State House currently, represent District 52B, live in Mendota Heights, represent Mendota Heights, Ember Grove Heights, Sunfish Lake, and a little bit a vegan. So thanks for inviting me to come backstage.
Well, thank you so much for listening, number one, and thank you for agreeing to jump on. And this is always unscripted, but we come together as friends who are sincere about community, about our culture, about our country, and about humanity. And so in that spirit, what's your take on what happened in the primaries for the DFL? Any surprises for you? Anything that you expected to happen that did happen? And as you sort of reflect on the concerns that I am raising and that Yusef and Brenda and I have talked about, what are your thoughts? Set us straight, if you would, or endorse, or qualify what we're presenting individually, collectively as analyses of where we are.
Well, I think one of the most important things that you all lifted up was how low the turnout was on Tuesday. It was much lower than what we saw in the previous election cycle. And so just in terms of kind of thinking about comparisons, you were talking about Melton and how he performed and how he lost by a much greater range. I think you said it was something like 19 points, if I remember correctly, around that. But if we look at voter turnout, he actually got more votes than former council member Samuels when he was running. And so I think that there's also some analysis around the low voter turnout. Someone made the statement about a big part of how things play out in November is going to be based upon who can incite their base, who can incite their supporters to turn out to the polls. And I think what Tuesday is telling us is everyone has a whole bunch more work to do in order to get people to just show up to vote. And that you use the word alarmist. I will endorse that. I will endorse that word. All of the alarm bells
nationwide.
Yeah,
we need those 10 million Black votes just to start.
Representative, take a minute and review the last legislative session, particularly telling people what your priorities were and what you feel were your accomplishments, and what were the challenges and the things that were not accomplished by the Democrats or by the legislature because of how our power structure is in the state of Minnesota.
Yeah, I will just start by saying that when I was elected to the state house, Minnesota was unique. We were the only state legislature in the country that had a divided legislature. We had a Democratic-controlled House and a Republican-controlled Senate. I think now there are two states. There's Minnesota and one other state that has that very uncommon structure. And so as a result of that structure, what it really means is that literally every piece of legislation that gets signed into law is bipartisan by nature of the current makeup of the legislature. And with that makeup, you can still get important work done. I've worked in a divided legislature the entire time I've been here. And with that, was able to chief author the first in the nation missing and murdered Black women and girls task force and get that signed into law. Was able to become the first chamber in the United States. I wrote a House resolution declaring racism a public health crisis, became the first chamber in the nation to adopt that, and to develop the House Select Committee on Racial Justice, where we worked with the community to develop 83 community-driven recommendations, right, to really move the needle on the impacts of systemic racism within our state across systems. The Dignity in Pregnancy and Childbirth Act. Those things got done in a divided legislature. So there are things that can get done. But this year was very unique in that it felt like nothing was getting done for the first time. Typically I'll get 10 to 12 bills passed within a session. This session, 2. I was able to get 2 bills across the finish line this entire session. One that prohibits discrimination in organ transplants. A lot of people don't recognize that our medical system has been set up to delay treatment, particularly for Black folks. Looking at the Black coefficient that has been used to determine who gets in line to get a kidney transplant, it delays treatment for Black folks 2 to 4 years.
Wow. And
so being able to get that across the finish line was really important, but it left a lot of other big things on the table, from education, economic development. We know that the COVID pandemic has hit our community hard in terms of job loss. We have the highest, while everyone is touting these great numbers of, record low unemployment. Do you know who doesn't have record low unemployment?
Black
the same
people.
People who didn't have record low unemployment prior to the COVID pandemic.
Right.
And qualified immunity is what's holding up the George Floyd bill, the police and immunity bill, or I forgot the full name of it, but is that the key that's holding it up? They just will not let go of the fact that police are going to be protected?
That's part of it, but I mean, all of our bills focused on police reform were stalled this year. Absolutely everything. I mean, in the horrific aftermath of Amir Locke, to not get a no-knock warrant ban across the finish line was a real loss for our state. And and on top of those things as well, being in the midst of a public health crisis and having so many communities that are hurting, there are so many things from a health perspective that didn't make it across the finish line. Looking at what's happening in our schools, I mean, we are losing some of the best educators and educators of color out of the classrooms right now because the stress and the trauma that has been unrelenting. And for some folks, there's sort of this idea that the trauma began when the COVID pandemic began.
No.
For some of us, no,
that before.
Yeah, that trauma is in our DNA, right? And so, and so, kind of that trauma on trauma piece. What we are seeing is that our schools are becoming less safe for our students. The number of viral incidents that we saw of racism playing out within our school hallways, and when people are asking these questions around, well, why are BIPOC students overwhelmingly opting for virtual learning when they can come back into a classroom? And if your experience with coming into a classroom involves you being referred to as monkeys, or having having young Muslim girls having their hijabs snatched off their head, would you want to be in that space? And within that classroom. And so just understanding that with the lack of things that got done in a time when we're talking about a 10 billion plus surplus that the state is sitting on, and so many communities that are hurting, it's a huge loss to the entire state of Minnesota.
$10 billion. So is the issue policy or the issue control of the spending? It seems to me one argument is many of the things that the legislature brought forward were things that really both sides could agree on, but the agreement did not come, was blocked, was held up because it would appear that Democrats were successful in authoring and providing solutions. Republicans are saying probably if they get control of the House, they'll do some of the same things, but they don't want Democrats to get credit for it. But more than that, they want to simply just give the money back and buy more hardware, more armor for police departments, and take the hard line and not be sympathetic or not hear this idea of reforming and broadening the scope of how communities respond to challenges that families, individuals, and communities face under the umbrella of our law enforcement or peacekeeping obligation. What do you think?
So I think there's a couple of things going on, and it's really interesting because at the top of this, when I joined, you were talking about sort of this idea of fractures within, the Democratic Party, because you got Samuels, and what does Samuels, what is he for? What is Omar for? And similar things are happening on the other side of the aisle as well. Right. And right now, there are sort of new groups that have come up to challenge a lot of what they consider to be the establishment of Republicans. And the important question that was asked, what do you stand for? And for them, they stand for no government, like no government at all. And so with that, what that means is there's never
is that no government as in libertarian, no government, or different? I don't know if that's the right label or not.
Yeah, I think it's going down that same pathway. The idea that government is too big and that government shouldn't be here to solve problems.
Laissez-faire, let the market do what it needs to do.
Yeah, exactly. And so with that comes this idea of we don't spend anything. We just like what it will be, it will be. And I think the irony of that is some of the same individuals who take that hard line and tout and who are almost daring people to spend money. Like, yes, spend money and then see what the response will be from your base. I would just like to take stock of how many of them have enjoyed any level of COVID relief, be that a payroll protection loan or anything that has helped to soften the blow of the pain that our economy has been going through.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation. So happy to have State Representative Ruth Richardson joining us today here with my colleague, Brenda Lyle-Gray, who joins us every day from New Mexico, and my friend and colleague, Ndugu Yusef Mgeni, master communicator, organizer, civic leader, and servant. And thanks for the conversation. I want to take the last few minutes to do something that Brenda and I and Yusef are doing before we began the program. Join in, please. Ruth Richardson. We're going to sort of walk down a memory lane. Brenda we pulled up a series of photographs from the grade school that Brenda and I attended back in Kansas City. Brenda and I were in the kindergarten together. We're both 74, 75 now. Been a long time, but I enjoy the fact that we are working together now. I probably haven't seen you, Brenda, since in person, probably since 4th or 5th grade. No, 6th, maybe 7th grade.
Maybe.
Because I left Central and went to Westport.
Right.
And I might not have seen you during our high school years. I might have, but it's been that long. I mean, at best, I was seeing you last in, say, 1964. Which would have been our junior year. So it's good to be working with you now. But put those pictures up and walk us through them. And Ruth, if you have comments about any nostalgia that brings to you or Yusef, let's just have some fun. And Brenda, you walk us through what we're looking at.
The first desegregation plan in 1955. I think we have discussed this. We had a school on 30th and Benton Boulevard. It was called Benton Elementary, and when the white flight parents decided they were going to take their children out of the school, and we were supposed to move in the following week, they burned the school. So our class ended up at a dance hall, and Al fussed about having to walk those blocks, and they were long blocks because Benton was very close. And I think we could have gone home for lunch on some occasions, but it was just a good time. Their neighborhoods were, all professions. My parents had 8th grade educations, but my father worked 3 jobs. So my mother could stay at home with me. School was first. This picture right here, the May Day Festival, is so interesting because I had just mentioned right before that a lot of the whites from the suburbs would come and see us in our costumes, and we learned so much. We prepared starting in February and had the May Day Festival in May, and we studied each class had a different country, and we studied the language, and we studied the food and the culture, and it was beautiful. And 70 years later, we're still remembering this. And I guess as a former educator, I keep wondering, why can't we go back to this type of joy instead of our children dodging under desks from a bullet? I don't know how we got from here to where we are today, but we can't give up. We've got to get in and dig in for the fight and bring our children where this young lady went. Ruby Bridges.
Ruby Bridges, yeah.
And
it shows some more
that
pictures.
other picture at the top is called Welcome to the Neighborhood. And that's who we were. That was the first year that we had the desegregation. But this is so cool here. It was a lot of fun, and we felt safe and we were happy. I used to tell Al with his cousin Bernard, who was one of, I call Yusef the St. Paul Brain Trust. Well, this young man was the Kansas City Force. He was an activist, and he had a passion for his community and his neighborhood. And he observed. There was a drugstore on the corner, and he knew that they were, and this was like 58, 59, and they were running drugs out of this drugstore. And he knew it, but there were certain ways and certain strategic things that he did where he didn't, put himself in danger at the time. And I always say that if he had lived, he was murdered. How old was he? Al, do you remember?
30. He's 33, I think, when he got killed. Yeah.
He would have been in the White House. Every time he'd walk in a room, it was silent because they never knew what he was going to say or what he was going to do. This is a great picture here. That was in the Star. I remember that.
Flip through some more pictures, Vash. Yeah.
Now, this was our riots. This was 1968. This was right after, I don't know if it was the following day, because when the riots broke out down on 31st Street, it was dark. Because I remember all of the smoke and everything going up in the air. But I think that was downtown when that part broke up. But it reminds me of the 1967 picture I saw of the soldiers going down the street in Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a familiar photo all over the country, Brenda.
Yeah, it is. And this is so funny. Every time I look at this was the new post office they put in our neighborhood. And my mother was so funny. She dressed up and she put on her Topaz Avon cologne, and she'd go to the post office. And it was such a big deal because this was a new a post office in our community where our residents could walk and mail letters and mailboxes and stuff. And that was a big thing too. And this is what the boss says all the time. You're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. And they consider us to be part of the problem and have never considered us to be part of the solution, because we know what our people need and we know what our children need. So I thought this was an interesting picture too, because there were so many neighborhood clubs and neighborhood councils. And during Christmas holidays, uniformity in the blocks where all of the Blacks lived. And one block would have candles, and all of the houses would be lit up with these candles. And, it was just what Tyrone Terrell, who is a native Kansas Cityan as well, he always says, knock on Miss Fanny's door and make for sure she's okay. If you make for sure that the people in your block, even if everyone, and they had block captains, they made for sure if they didn't see Miss Cheatham in 3 days and she's normally going to the bus stop, that somebody is going to find out. Well, they don't even speak to neighbors anymore, so somehow we've got to get back there, but we better get back there quick, because that's when you'll see the 10 billion spent, is if they take over both houses, because they've been waiting. We're not going to spend any on them, but if we're in power, then we'll spend it on us.
We're out of time, Brenda. This has been wonderful walking through this, and we'll do more of this. Any thoughts, Ruth Yusef?
Well, you asked about our nightmares. Mine is that January 6th was a rehearsal.
It was.
Proud Boys, the Boogaloo Boys, the Klan. These folks are recruiting former soldiers and military personnel. They're recruiting a lot of law enforcement officers. We're at the January 6th attempted takeover of the Capitol. And I think a lot of people are going to be moving to Cuba and the Caribbean and South America.
I am so surprised about that. Everyone's brushing off their passport.
Yeah,
if the
former president is reelected.
One quick before we get off, I thought Elon Musk had a real good point that the president had gone and made so much effort to get Brittany Griner home. What about the young Black men who are still in jail for holding a joint?
Mm-hmm.
He had a point.
Yeah.
I think we need to think about that.
Sure.
Ruth Richardson, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are we need to vote like our life depends on it, because it truly does. And, as Brenda was going through all of those photographs and just thinking about the histories, our histories that are so intertwined, we are getting further and further away from that sense of community. And so I just echo what you say. We need to get back there, and we need to get back to those roots quickly.
We do.
Well, Ruth Richardson, Representative Ruth Richardson, thank you so much for your leadership, your service, and for being here today.
And feel better.
Come back. Yeah, anytime. And you know what? Our intent is to create a space where you and all of your colleagues, all of the Black electeds and other people of color electeds, show up regularly and both project and criticize and analyze, mostly inform our constituent communities about opportunity, challenges, and solutions. Allow us to generate solutions, because that's where it's all going to come from, us, the people. Listen, thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. Take care.
Stay safe.
I love Thursdays and Fridays.
Mm-hmm.